Spring break, 2022, Houston, Texas. A husband brings his pregnant wife breakfast in bed. There's a biscuit and a tall glass of water. He sets the tray down, sits next to her, and starts watching her. Not the way a man watches someone he loves. The way someone watches a plan unfold. "Drink up," he tells her. "You need to stay hydrated. For the baby." She picks up the glass, looks down. The water isn't clear. Something's wrong, she thinks. But this is her husband. 11 years of marriage. 3 kids. This is the man she built her life with. So she tells herself maybe it's the pipes, maybe it's nothing. She drinks. 30 minutes later, she is doubled over with violent cramps. Bleeding. She drives herself to the emergency room alone. Her husband has already left for the office. She doesn't know it yet. But that morning was the first of 7 attempts. 7 times over the course of 2 months, her husband, a personal injury attorney with his own law firm in Houston, reached into his pocket, pulled out a plastic bag, and poured a white powder into her drinks. 7 times, methodically, covertly, with full knowledge of what that powder would do to her body, to his unborn child. His name is Mason Herring. And when they finally caught him on camera doing it, hand in pocket, powder into glass, sliding the drink across the counter to his wife, his explanation was this: the pregnancy would ruin his plans. It would make him look like a jerk. How does a man, educated, professional, a lawyer trained to know exactly where the lines of the law are, decide that the right response to an unwanted pregnancy is to secretly poison his own wife? Not once, 7 times. And here's the deeper question. Is Mason Herring a monster who appeared out of nowhere? A freak accident? A 1 in a billion aberration? Or is he the logical endpoint of something that's been growing, quietly, in the background of American culture for years? Because when you look at what Mason Herring believed about marriage, about women, about control, about what a man is owed, you're not looking at madness. You're looking at an ideology, one you've probably already heard of. Mason and Catherine Herring had been married for 11 years. By 2022, they lived in the Memorial area, one of Houston's most affluent neighborhoods. Mason ran the Herring Law Firm, a personal injury practice he had founded. He was 39 years old, successful, respected, the kind of man who, from the outside, looked like he had everything figured out. But in early 2022, the marriage was quietly unraveling. Catherine had caught Mason lying about his whereabouts. She found messages on his phone, texts with a former female colleague he claimed to have cut contact with. When she confronted him, he didn't deny it. He told her he needed to work on himself and moved out. The couple agreed to try marriage counseling, and then in February 2022, Catherine found out she was pregnant, their 3rd child. She told him during a counseling session. According to court documents, Mason's reaction was immediate and cold. He said the pregnancy would ruin his plans, that it would make him look like a jerk for leaving her while she was pregnant. Not, "I'm overwhelmed," not, "let me think." His first thought was about optics, about how this inconvenient development, his wife's pregnancy, his own child, would affect his image. He agreed to attend counseling. He agreed to spend spring break with the family. He told Catherine they would figure it out together. And then, quietly, he started making other plans. What is the red pill? And why does it matter here? Before we go any further, I need to explain something, because the Mason Herring story doesn't make sense in isolation. It only makes sense in context. In the last 15 years, a specific set of ideas about men, women, and power has spread through the internet with remarkable speed. It started in forums. It moved to YouTube. It colonized podcasts, social media, comment sections. You've probably heard the name, the red pill. The name is borrowed from the Matrix, the idea that most men are living in an illusion, and that the red pill reveals the brutal truth beneath it. Here's what that truth claims to be. Society has been feminized. Men have been systematically weakened and deceived. Women, by their biological nature, are incapable of genuine loyalty. They are, according to this worldview, fundamentally transactional, always seeking the highest status man available, always using relationships as leverage, always prioritizing their own advantage. The solution, according to the red pill, is for men to reclaim dominance. The movement has its own language. Alpha males sit at the top of the hierarchy, dominant, in control, emotionally unavailable, sexually successful. Beta males are the suckers, the men who play by society's rules, who treat women as equals, who negotiate and compromise. The goal of every man in this worldview is to ascend to alpha status and never descend from it. And what does being an alpha actually look like in practice? It looks like this. You control the relationship. You set the rules. You don't negotiate. You dictate. If a woman threatens to leave, you don't beg. You apply dread. You make her afraid of losing you. You don't show vulnerability. You don't defer to her emotional state. You maintain frame, the red pill term for unshakable dominance in every interaction. Children in this worldview are leverage. Pregnancy is a strategic event. A woman who gets pregnant has, in red pill terms, made a power move. She's created a legal and emotional bind that limits the man's freedom. And a man who finds himself trapped by an unwanted pregnancy, in the logic of the red pill, is a man who has lost frame, who has allowed a woman to seize control of his life. Now think about Mason Herring. His wife is pregnant, he's having an affair, he wants out. And his first thought is not grief or guilt or even anger. His first thought is about how the pregnancy will affect his plans. His image. He doesn't see a child, he sees a problem. He doesn't see his wife, he sees an obstacle, and he reaches for the most covert, most controlling solution available to him. Not violence, which would be traceable. Not an honest conversation, which might produce a result he didn't control. He reaches for a powder, and he decides what will happen inside her body, without her knowledge, without her consent. That is not a crime of passion. That is the logic of a man who believes that control is his right. March 17, 2022, spring break. The counselor had encouraged them to spend the week together. They watched movies. They said, "I love you." Catherine wanted desperately to believe it was real. That morning, Mason brought her the tray, the tall glass of water, the push to chug it. She noticed something was wrong. She called her mother, saying she was having pregnancy complications. She didn't reveal her real fear. She needed to be wrong. She wasn't. Within 30 minutes of drinking the water, the cramping started. Then severe bleeding. She drove herself to the emergency room. The doctors took samples. Mason never came to see her. When she got home, the drinks kept coming. March 21st. March 22nd. An orange sports bottle. A fountain drink from Sonic with something floating in it. An OJ carton with a broken seal. But Catherine had stopped drinking them. After that first morning, after the ER, after the cramping, after she looked at her husband's face and understood something she could barely allow herself to think, she made a decision. My instinct was, something is wrong. I need to protect myself, and I need to make sure he doesn't know I'm onto him, because I felt like that was the only way I could collect evidence. She saved the drinks. She found a private investigator. She reached out to a lab for testing while she waited for results. And then on April 24, 2022, Mason did something strange. He cleaned out his truck, took the trash to the curb. Catherine watched this through the window. She noted it specifically in her account to police because it was so out of character. Mason Herring did not do chores. He did not take out trash. He was getting rid of something. As soon as he left, she went to the trash can and looked inside. Open packets. A brand name she didn't recognize. Cyrux. A Mexican pharmacy version of the American drug Cytotec. The active ingredient, misoprostol, a medication used to induce abortions. She didn't need the lab results anymore, but she got them anyway. She had the drugs, she had the packaging, she had the lab results confirming what had been in her drinks, but what she didn't have yet, what would turn this from a wife's word against a husband's into something undeniable, something that would end up in front of the entire country, was the video, and it was already waiting for her on the cameras she had quietly installed in her own home. Catherine Herring had installed security cameras inside their memorial area home. She hadn't told Mason, and in the footage from those cameras there it was. Mason Herring in the kitchen, preparing a drink. He reaches into his pocket. He pulls out a Ziploc bag. He opens it, he tilts it over the glass, a fine white powder drifting into the liquid. He stirs it, picks up the drink, carries it to his wife. The whole sequence, on camera, in his own home. This was not a man acting in the heat of the moment. This was not an impulse, a breakdown, a loss of control. This was a man who had sourced a drug, likely obtained across the border in Mexico, where misoprostol is available without prescription, put it in a plastic bag, kept it in his pocket, and methodically deployed it over the course of more than a month. 7 attempts. Over 40 days. An OB/GYN consulted during the investigation told investigators something critical. Misoprostol, administered in unknown quantities, doesn't just cause abortion. It can cause heart damage, liver necrosis, kidney failure. Giving someone this drug without their knowledge, the doctor said plainly, is an assault. Mason Herring knew this. He was a lawyer. He understood consequences. He understood risk. And he decided that the risk to his wife's life, to his own child's life, was acceptable collateral, because the alternative was losing control of the situation. Catherine took everything to Houston police: the drinks, the packaging, the lab results, the video. And then she waited. Nearly a month passed before an arrest was made, a delay that frustrated her deeply, particularly given the state's aggressive posture on abortion-related issues at the time. When the arrest finally came, Mason Herring became the first person in Harris County history to be charged with felony assault to induce abortion. He had made history, just not the kind he'd planned. The baby survived. Catherine Herring gave birth 10 weeks early. The girl, named Josephine, weighed just over 3 pounds. She spent weeks in the NICU. She had a feeding tube. She has significant developmental delays. She attends therapy 8 times a week. She is alive because her mother stopped drinking the water. Think about that. The only reason Josephine Herring exists and breathes today is because her mother looked into a glass of water, noticed it wasn't clear, and trusted her instincts. If Catherine had finished that first glass without questioning it, the drug would have worked. The pregnancy would have ended, and Mason Herring would have gone back to his affair and his plans, and no one would have known. He almost got away with it. And here is the part of this story that made the entire country stop and stare. In February 2024, Mason Herring stood before a judge in Harris County and pleaded guilty. Not to the most serious charge, assault forcing an individual to have an abortion. That charge was dropped as part of the plea deal. He pleaded guilty to injury to a child and assault of a pregnant person. The sentence: 180 days in county jail, 10 years probation, 6 months. For 7 attempts to secretly abort his own child, Catherine Herring stood in that courtroom and looked at her husband directly. She spoke to him, and she said, calmly, with the steadiness of a woman who had been holding this for 2 years, "I do not believe that 180 days is justice for attempting to kill your child 7 separate times." She compared the sentence to the number of days Josephine had a feeding tube inside her body. She noted that the probation, 10 years, was 1 year less than the length of their marriage. Mason's own attorney called the deal good and suggested that with time, everyone would be fine. No lives were lost. No permanent injuries have occurred, the defense attorney told the court. That young child will go forward and I think be fine. Josephine attends therapy 8 times a week. The sentence sparked a national conversation. Women's rights advocates pointed out that in Texas, a state where women have faced criminal investigation for self-managed miscarriages, a man who secretly drugged his wife 7 times received 6 months. Reproductive justice organizations noted the brutal irony. The state that had passed some of the most aggressive abortion restrictions in the country gave the lightest possible sentence to a man who forced an abortion on someone against her will and without her consent. The case became a lens, and what it revealed was not pretty. Mason Herring served his sentence and was released. He was ordered to stay 500 feet from Catherine at all times. No contact, no communication. Within a year, he had violated the order twice. He called her twice. On February 11th, he violated the perimeter twice during supervised visits with his 3 children, including Josephine, the daughter he had tried to abort. Prosecutors alleged he knew exactly when Catherine would arrive to drop off the kids. He pulled up nearby in a vehicle and waited. In October 2025, a judge sentenced Mason Herring to 8 years in prison for the probation violations. He is currently incarcerated, but here's what makes this case more than a crime story. Here's what makes it a mirror. Mason Herring was not a man at the fringes of society. He was not a drifter, someone with nothing to lose. He was a successful attorney. He had a firm. He had a reputation. He had, by every outward measure, achieved the life that the culture told him he was supposed to want. And yet, when that life produced something he hadn't planned for, a pregnancy he couldn't control, a wife who wouldn't disappear quietly, a future that looked different from his design, he did not adapt. He did not accept. He reached for control. And when the conventional tools of control failed, the affair, the separation, the emotional manipulation, he reached for something more literal. A powder, in a bag, in his pocket. Now compare that to a case that happened 5,000 miles away just a few years later. The Brazilian parallel, when the ideology goes all the way. In February 2026, a 32-year-old woman named Giselle Alves Santana was found dead in her apartment on the 27th floor of a building in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Her husband, A lieutenant colonel in the São Paulo military police, 21 years her senior, called emergency services and calmly reported that she had shot herself. He was dry. The shower was running, but there were no wet footprints. There were bruises on her jaw and neck that forensic experts said were consistent with someone holding her face while pressing a gun to her temple. She had told friends, in WhatsApp messages recovered during the investigation, that she believed her husband could kill her at any moment. She had tried to leave him. That morning, investigators believe, she told him the relationship was over. What made the Brazilian case explode in the media, beyond the forensics, beyond the cover-up, beyond the arrest, were the messages found on his phone, sent by him to her in WhatsApp. "I treat you the way every alpha male treats his wife, with love, care, attention, and the authority of an alpha male provider and an obedient, submissive beta female, as every married woman should be. While you're married to me and living in my house, under my command, things will be done my way." A woman's place is at home taking care of her husband, not out in the streets looking for trouble. Word for word, the vocabulary, the hierarchy, the ideology, the same framework, a different continent, a different method, the same destination. A man who could not tolerate losing control of a woman and who used whatever was available to him to prevent it. Mason Herring used a powder. Geraldo Neto, lieutenant colonel decorated officer, allegedly used a gun. 2 men, 2 countries, 1 belief system. So how does a Houston attorney, educated, successful, the kind of man who argues in courtrooms about other people's harm, decide to secretly poison his pregnant wife 7 times? The answer is simpler and more disturbing than we want it to be. He believed the child was a problem to be solved. He believed his plans took priority. He believed that what happened inside his wife's body was ultimately under his jurisdiction, not hers. That belief, the belief that a man's authority over his household extends to his wife's body, her choices, her pregnancy, her future, is not unique to Mason Herring. It is codified, systematized, spread through forums and podcasts and YouTube channels and comment sections, dressed up in evolutionary psychology and ancient scripture and self-help language, marketed to young men as liberation when it is actually the oldest cage there is. The red pill didn't cause Mason Herring to drug his wife, but it provided the architecture, the logic, the permission structure that says a man's plans matter more. A woman's body is a resource. Control is not just acceptable, it is the natural order, and when that logic encounters an obstacle, it cannot argue away. A pregnancy, a separation, a woman who has decided to leave, it finds a solution. Sometimes the solution is a powder, sometimes it's a gun, sometimes it's years of isolation and control that never makes the news at all. The outcome of the Mason Herring case: Mason Herring pleaded guilty to 2 felonies. He served 6 months in Harris County Jail. He violated his protective order twice. He is now serving 8 years in a Texas prison. He has lost his law license. His daughter, Josephine, the child he tried 7 times to abort, attends therapy 8 times a week. Catherine Herring advocates publicly for victims of domestic violence and reproductive coercion. Josephine is alive. Her father will be in prison until she is old enough to understand why. There is one image from this story I want to leave you with. Catherine Herring sitting in a hospital room after her first trip to the emergency room. The cramps have stopped. The bleeding has slowed. She is pregnant. Her husband is at work. He hasn't called to check on her. She picks up her phone. She almost calls him. She almost says, "Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me there's another explanation." But she doesn't. Instead, she does something that will save her daughter's life. She starts saving the drinks. She doesn't scream. She doesn't confront him. She doesn't run. She goes home. She pretends everything is normal, and she quietly, methodically builds the case that will eventually put him in prison. "I just needed to make sure he didn't know I was onto him, because I felt like that was the only way I could protect myself." She outplayed a lawyer in his own house with his own cameras, and Josephine Herring is alive because her mother is that kind of woman. Here in Texas, we talk a lot about rights: the right to bear arms, the right to religious freedom, the right to live without government interference in private life. But here is a question worth sitting with. What about Catherine Herring's rights? What about her right to carry a pregnancy to term without being secretly poisoned? Her right to make decisions about her own body with accurate information? Her right to leave a marriage without her husband deciding that her body's choices belong to him? The Red Pill movement will tell you it's about male empowerment, about men reclaiming what was taken from them, about truth in a world of comfortable lies. But what Mason Herring did, and what Geraldo Neto, thousands of miles away in Brazil, allegedly did in an even more final way, is show you where that ideology actually leads when you follow it to its conclusion. It doesn't lead to strength. It leads to a man with a powder in his pocket, watching his pregnant wife drink. It leads to control that cannot accept the word no. It leads to a little girl named Josephine attending 8 therapy sessions a week because her father decided his plans mattered more than her life. The red pill says it wakes men up, but a man who has to poison his wife to keep her from leaving isn't powerful. He's terrified. And the most dangerous thing in the world, more dangerous than anger, more dangerous than violence, is a frightened man who has convinced himself that his fear is actually dominance. But the story of what that ideology has built, the online communities, the influencers, the rabbit holes that millions of young American men fall into every single day, is a story even darker than Mason Herring, and it starts in a place you might not expect. If you enjoy this type of content, please subscribe to our channel and like this video to support our project.